This is one of a series of video lessons made for the grade 12 IEB English Home Language students who are studying Siphiwe, Gloria and Ndlovu's novel, The Theory of Flight, for their final examinations. This particular video is intended to be watched before you start reading the novel. We've often told you never to judge a book by its cover, but in this case, the cover tells us so much about the content of this novel. So let's start with the title. What do you understand by the theory of flight? If you type in theory of flight in your search engine, you'll land on some pages about literal flying, the study of physics and aerodynamics that explain how an aeroplane is able to fly. You'll read about the 4 factors needed for flight: weight, thrust, lift, and drag. In other words, you'll learn about aeronautical theory, but you'd be wasting your time. When the author was asked about the title of the novel in an interview, she said that she hadn't thought too much about the title, and that she certainly was not referring to Bernoulli's theory of flight that some of you will learn in your physics classes. So what does the title mean? According to the author, she wants us to think about the following concepts: the freedom we have to determine our own trajectory in life, and flight in terms of the imagination, being able to imagine things that at first don't seem possible. Have the book in front of you, and let's start with this diagram at the center top. Gulidi Gumede is obsessed with aeroplanes, and he believes that one day, if people really work at it, you'll be able to fly away and find true independence. This diagram is Gulide's prototype for Elizabeth Nyoni, who wants to fly to Nashville to become a country and western singer, just like Dolly Parton. In the top right-hand corner of the cover, you'll see a Viscount aeroplane and a swallow, the migratory bird. Now, the novel opens with a real-life event, when Gulidi Gumede shoots down a Vickers Viscount aeroplane on the 3rd of September 1978. As you can see, the symbolism of flight and flying is clearly depicted. The dotted lines that you see linking images on the cover indicate both travel and intersections of the story. There is deliberate ambiguity in the novel, and you as a reader are required to join the dots in order to create meaning. On the right is a red heart, a jeweled heart, and this is a powerful symbol in the novel, representing the precious and beautiful something left behind by Gulide's race of angels and genie. The AK-47 is the weapon carried by war veterans, the freedom fighters that fought for the independence of this unnamed Southern African country that is the setting of the novel. It's also a reminder of the soldiers who attack the central farm in the novel, Beaufort Farm and Estate, resulting in the massacre of many of the residents on that farm. The 2 hands represent issues of race. The white and black hands are obviously a reference to the relationships between black and white people in the novel, but it is also a reference to Gulidi Gumede, who is an albino. And in case you haven't got it yet, flying birds are an important symbol in the novel. This little blue bird is a European roller, another migratory bird. And in terms of one of the themes of the novel, colonization, Having a European roll on the cover of the novel is a delightfully tongue-in-cheek detail. This golden egg is centrally placed on the cover for a reason. It represents the main character, Jeannie. Her full name is Imogen Zula Nyoni, and her names are references to her innocence, her blamelessness. She's like a magical creature, a genie who can make wishes come true. Zula is a bird. The golden egg depicts something of value. It's a precious item, and you'll see how the color gold permeates the novel. And of course, you can also think of colonial attitudes to Africa, where wealth was defined by things, mineral resources, and not by people. It's difficult to define the genre of this novel. These symbols of ruby hearts and golden eggs are typical of magical realism, but the author herself is uncomfortable with pigeonholing the novel as an example of magical realism. Pigeonholing. See what I did there? While much of the narrative is bleak, it is the presence of these sunflowers that leave the reader with a sense of hope. These flowers are the backdrop to a number of events in the novel, and some are quite harrowing, but they remain firmly rooted right until the final section of the novel. As we have already seen, traveling is an important motif in the novel. This suitcase belongs to Jeannie. She places in it all of her precious possessions, items that she keeps from her life on the Beaufort farm and estate, from before the massacre on the farm and before she's raped by the soldiers. Hers isn't the only suitcase mentioned in the novel. Many of the characters travel. They migrate like the birds and pack their possessions in their suitcases. The trolley belongs to Vida. Most characters call him Jesus. He lives on the street and packs all of his possessions in a supermarket trolley. And the trolley is named Scania, after the Swedish brand of lorries and trucks. Vida will use the trolley to save Jeannie's life when she's knocked over by Cookie and flies through the air. Once you've read the novel, you'll realize just how clever the design of this cover is. And you should ask yourself what other symbols could be added to it. For example, an elephant, especially as the author's surname, Ndlovu, means elephant. Jacaranda trees are important in the novel, especially when some of them are felled. A world atlas is referenced many times, as is a yellow formica table with 4 chairs. Sometimes novels have different covers depending on when and where they are published. Consider this alternative cover for the novel. What do you see here? What are the similarities, the differences? What other symbols have been used by this illustrator? It's important to read the back cover of all novels. Now take a moment to read the blurb of this novel. I recommend that you look online for Tsitsi Dangaremga's opinions of the novel. She's a Zimbabwean novelist, a playwright, a filmmaker, and her debut novel, Nervous Conditions, which was the first to be published in English by a black woman from Zimbabwe, was named by the BBC in 2018 as one of the top 100 books that have shaped the world. Do some research on the author, Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu. Consider why this novel is deemed so important that it's worthy of study by grade 12s following the IEB curriculum. As you start reading the novel, and you inevitably get confused by the non-chronological timeline and the elements of magical realism, consider this quote by the author. I wanted people to make connections and to think that maybe something was a dead end, and then maybe 100 pages later that thing circles back, showing the interconnections of stories and lives. Don't be intimidated by the text. The author wants you to experience this confusion. Get a notebook and start making notes, writing down questions you have, while bearing in mind these pointers from the author, that one of the main themes of the novel is interconnectivity, that characters drop in and out of each other's lives over a number of years. And Lorvo advises you to treat the novel in a holistic way. Don't get bogged down in the details in your first reading. Accept that you're experiencing multiple perspectives of a story. And as eyewitness accounts of any events will differ, so too will the characters in this novel have different points of view of the same events. Try not to bring your preconceived and learned notions of the world to the novel. Be open to learning about historical events from a completely different perspective, and that very often there are multiple truths, endless possibilities surrounding a particular event. And don't get bogged down in the literal interpretation of symbols. For example, when the golden egg is taken to Beaufort Farm and Estate, and later when Jeannie's birth is described as coming from this golden egg. These are the elements of magical realism that require your suspension of belief. Ultimately, you will have to write a 600-word literary essay about this novel, and you will only do well if you have really engaged with this text. I advise you to start a study circle, a literature circle, with some of your friends. Meet regularly and discuss the issues in the novel. Try to figure out together what everything means, but also accept that there's no clear-cut answer to questions. You'll disagree with your friends, and that's a good thing. When you have time, set aside an hour to watch this interview with the author. It's available on YouTube. I need to make a comment about the setting. The country in which the events take place is never named, despite the many clues and references that make it obvious that it's Zimbabwe. The author is on record as saying that this lack of identification is a deliberate choice on her part. She has written a cautionary tale that can be applied to any of the African countries still grappling with the aftermath of colonization and independence. And here's another video that I recommend that you watch on YouTube. It gives you a short 16-minute summary of the history of Zimbabwe. It'll give you a sense of the historical events which impact on individuals. While you're on YouTube, watch some reviews of the novel. It's important that you cover the whole spectrum, from positive to negative reviews. When you get to studying and exam preparation, you'll find some excellent notes on the novel on the LitNet website. Nothing can take the place of your own reading and understanding of the novel. But if you want a study guide, these are the 3 that are currently available. An English teacher from Michaelhouse, Dr. Boraine, has a very useful teaching blog called Delicious English, where she posts information about matric literature. I highly recommend that you visit her blog during the course of the year. If you prefer audiobooks, there are a couple of options. For my students, Miss Baker has created an audiobook on the St. David's Google site, but only St. David's boys will be able to access this. For other schools, you can listen to Miss van der Skeef's reading on YouTube. It is interesting to note that when the theory of flight was prescribed by the IEB, It was the first and only book published by Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu. She has since written 2 more novels, all dealing with the characters in The Theory of Flight. The Theory of Flight was published in 2018, but it's actually the concluding novel of a trilogy, which the author says she wrote backwards. The Theory of Flight was followed in 2020 with The History of Man, where some of the events of The Theory of Flight are retold, but from a completely different perspective. The setting of the novel is the pre-colonial history of the unnamed Southern African country. In 2022, she published The Quality of Mercy, the novel which acts as a bridge between the pre- and post-colonial settings. The novels are now called the City of Kings trilogy. This is a reference to Bulawayo, the unnamed city that is the central setting of all 3 novels. It's now time to get reading. You'll need to annotate the text as you work your way through the novel. Don't let the initial complexity of the plot put you off. It will sort itself out as you go along. And remember, the more you put in now, the less you'll have to do before your final exam in November. Good luck, everyone.